I, preparing for the journey. I was 13 years old when my family and I ended up driving through a town that simply shouldn't exist, if it ever truly did at all. The event remains burned in my mind, resurfacing every so often in half-remembered nightmares and occasional family conversations that end in hushed tones and exchanged looks. Even now, more than a decade later, we can't fully explain what happened that night. We were traveling either to or from Washington State on our way to Oklahoma. We'd done that trip many times, often sticking to the same routes, but one year was different. One year, we strayed from our typical path. It's strange how road trips have a rhythm of their own. You wake early, pile bags into the back of an SUV or car, fuss with your phone or GPS, and then drive for hours on end, stopping only for gas, snacks, or quick rest breaks. By 2012, we accumulated a handful of these long-distance migrations, usually chasing either better weather or a new start. Some years, we spent the majority of summer in Washington. Other years, we headed home to Oklahoma for family obligations. We'd also made a few trips that straddled the holiday seasons, though the exact month always blurs in hindsight. That particular trip is no exception. I can't recall if it was late summer or early fall. My memory is peppered with inconsistencies, possibly the result of minor head trauma I'd experienced in my teens. I do know I was 13 going on 14, my sister was 9 or 10, my older brother was in his late teens or early 20s, and his girlfriend, now wife, was close to his age. My mom was the linchpin of the family, practical, protective, and unwaveringly stubborn when she wanted us to stick to a plan. Yet even her sure-footed planning couldn't save us from the detour we ended up taking. Looking back, I wonder if fate pushed us toward that bizarre pit stop. Maybe we missed a turn. Maybe the GPS malfunctioned. Perhaps there was construction or an unexpected closure on the main route. None of us has a clear recollection of how we ended up on a stretch of road lined with towering pine trees that seemed to reach for the darkening sky. The only thing we're certain of is that by the time we realized something was amiss, it was already too late. 2. The long, dark highway. We were caravanning in 2 vehicles. In the SUV, I sat in the back seat with my sister, who was half dozing with headphones on. Mom was driving, her knuckles occasionally whitening on the steering wheel whenever a big rig passed us. The road was a narrow 2-lane highway, swallowed on both sides by dense forest. In the trailing car, my older brother drove while his girlfriend dozed. His headlights kept a consistent, comforting presence in our rearview mirror. The day had started early, around dawn, but we'd lost track of time in a blur of gas stations, rest stops, and convenience store lunches. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, we were still far from any major city. The GPS claimed our next town wasn't for another 60 or 70 miles, and we dreaded having to drive that distance while running on fumes, both in terms of energy and the car's fuel gauges. My brother called my mom on her cell, his voice crackling through speakerphone. "Hey, I'm getting tired," he said. "My girlfriend's already knocked out. You mind if we stop soon?" Mom glanced at the GPS suction cup to the windshield, frowning at the next route marker. "We can't see any hotels for at least 40 miles. But if we spot something, we'll stop. I'm wiped too." I remember the sigh in her voice, a mixture of reluctance and concern. We rarely stopped at unknown motels, especially not after dark, but that night, the fatigue spoke louder than caution. My sister stirred, removing her headphones. "Are we stopping soon?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. "I'm sleepy." My mom exchanged a look with me in the rearview mirror, a silent agreement passing between us. We'd push on a little longer, but the moment we saw a place to rest, we'd pull in. The tall pines loomed like silent sentinels, their outlines lost in the darkness beyond our headlights. Suddenly, up ahead, I noticed a glow, streetlights maybe. That familiar orange hue that used to be common before white LEDs took over. It was odd because the GPS still showed nothing but a blank stretch of highway, with the next official town miles away. Maybe it was an unincorporated area or a tiny settlement that hadn't made it into the map database. "Mom, look," I said, leaning forward. "Lights. Maybe a small town?" My brother's call came through again. "You see that? Looks like a town or something." Mom slowed down slightly, letting the headlights reveal the outlines of buildings and a single-lane road branching off to the right. A green road sign, reflective in our headlights, flickered into view. The name of the town was printed on it in big letters. Letters I can't recall no matter how hard I try. Nor can my family. The moment we drove past that sign, I felt a wave of anxiety in my chest, though I couldn't explain why at the time. It might have been the color of the streetlights. Instead of the usual warm, comforting glow, these lights had a sickly hue, somewhere between yellow and orange, like old bulbs about to go out. Or maybe it was the eerie silence. Most small towns at least have a car or two, or the faint buzz of neon from a diner. But as we cruised into this place, we saw nothing but empty sidewalks, darkened storefronts, and no people at all. Even the air in the SUV felt heavier, as if the atmosphere was denser. An ominous feeling. By then, it was late enough that a small town could indeed be shutting down for the night. But something about the emptiness was off, like it wasn't just late, it was abandoned. My sister, now fully awake, peered through the window. "Where is everybody?" she murmured. I didn't answer, but I remember the goosebumps prickling my arms. My brother called Mom again. "Look," he said, "I'm really feeling beat. Maybe we can find a motel here. Even if it's not on the map, there must be something." My mom hesitated for a moment, then responded, "Sure, we can look around for a place." She ended the call, letting her foot off the gas a bit. As we drove deeper, the buildings became more clearly visible under the flickering streetlights. They were older structures, reminiscent of the 1950s or 60s. Flat-roofed shops, small bungalows, an abandoned gas station with rusted pumps. No signage indicated a brand or chain, just vague hints of what they'd once been. A strange hush clung to every corner, as though even the wind had decided to avoid this place. A chill slid down my spine. For some reason, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Yet no one peered out from windows. No shapes moved behind drawn curtains. It was that sense you get when you enter a silent room and just know someone's in there with you, holding their breath. But scanning the sidewalks and the doorways of these buildings revealed nothing. It was empty, frighteningly so. The church on the hill. Suddenly, we spotted a church perched on a small rise to the right, one of the only structures lit by a clean, white light instead of that sickly orange. Mom steered toward it, turning into the gravel lot. The SUV's beams illuminated a weathered sign that read something like ______ church, though I can't recall the name. It struck me as odd that this light was different from the rest, almost like it was a beacon. My brother followed in the car, pulling up beside us. We parked near the entrance, stepping out to stretch our legs. As soon as I exited, the cold night air hit me, carrying a musty odor, like stagnant water or decaying leaves. The gravel under my shoes crunched loudly in the silence, making me flinch. In the faint illumination from the church door, I saw my brother whisper something to his girlfriend, who still looked groggy. My mom glanced around, wariness evident in her posture. She reached for her phone again, presumably to see if she could look up a motel. My sister hovered close by me, her little hand brushing against mine. Then, from across the lot, near a massive dumpster that sat half in darkness, came a sudden scrape of movement. It was like gravel shifting underfoot, or something small darting out of sight. My mom's head snapped up. She locked eyes with me. I'd heard it, too. Instantly, that sense of being watched intensified. The dumpster itself was barely visible in the poor light, just a hulking shadow with a corrugated top. "Get back in the car," Mom said, her voice low and urgent. I stiffened, feeling a wave of defiance rise up. Typical teenage impulses, but the fear was stronger. My sister whimpered softly. We both scrambled back into the SUV. The last thing I saw before slamming the door was my brother escorting his girlfriend to their own car, then quickly joining Mom near the driver's seat of our vehicle. They spoke in hushed tones, nodding at the GPS, pressing buttons to input an address. Something about the entire scene felt unbearably wrong. No church was open at that hour. No caretaker emerged to ask if we needed help. The building's one bright light just shone eerily on the door and the gravel, illuminating our fear like a spotlight. Within moments, they finished and jumped into their cars. The vehicles roared to life, headlights cutting across the parking lot. I caught a fleeting glimpse of a shape moving behind the dumpster, but I forced myself not to stare. Then we were driving again, heading further into town, though I silently wished we'd just leave altogether. 6. Into the heart of the town. The roads were unnaturally clean. No litter, no signs of wear, not even the usual scattered leaves you'd expect under streetlights. The buildings we passed appeared similarly unblemished, as though someone diligently scrubbed every window, swept every sidewalk. Yet that only served to heighten the unnatural emptiness. My mom slowed the SUV to a crawl. We saw the faint neon word, motel, flicker in the distance, though half the letters were burned out. Only the M and O shone brightly, the rest stuttering in a pale pinkish hue. My brother's car stayed close behind, the headlights reflecting in our side mirrors. We reached the edge of the main street, turning down a small side road at the GPS's prompting. It led us down a gravel path, flanked by ominously tall trees. At the bottom of a gentle slope sat an old-fashioned two-story L-shaped motel. A solitary light stood in the near-empty parking lot, humming with that odd white glow. The building had about 30 or 40 rooms, the kind you'd see in old movies where each door opens onto the outside walkway. Off to the left was a tiny structure that must have been the check-in office. My mom parked, engine idling for a moment. We all stared through the windshield at the silent building. Dark wood surrounded the lot on 3 sides, only a small portion cleared for parking. The single light cast elongated shadows of the cars on the gravel, distorting their shapes into looming silhouettes. After a beat, Mom said, "I'll go check if they have a vacancy. Let's not waste more time." My brother pulled up alongside. His window rolled down, and he signaled that he and his girlfriend would stay put. Mom gave him a nod. Then she turned to me and my sister. "Stay here," she ordered. "Lock the doors. Don't get out unless I say." Mom stepped out. I locked the SUV doors immediately, my heart drumming in my ears. Through the large window of the check-in building, we could see her inside, talking to someone at the front desk. That's when things grew truly bizarre. Even though we were all looking at the same scene, the same window, the same person behind the counter, my sister, my brother, and I each perceived him differently. I was close enough to see that he appeared old, almost decrepit. His skin hung loosely from his frame, and he had a scowl carved into his features. His eyes were shadowed, like he'd been awake for days, or maybe he was just weary of life. Every movement he made seemed labored, as though it pained him to stand upright. When my sister later described him, she insisted she saw a younger man, maybe in his 20s, pacing behind the counter, looking annoyed rather than exhausted. My brother claimed the desk clerk was middle-aged, with a beard and a dismissive attitude. Each of us was adamant. Each of us was certain our version was correct. Even years later, we argue about it, shaking our heads in disbelief. Mom, of course, had her own impression, but she's never shared many details of that conversation, other than the clerk didn't smile once. He just asked for cash payment. We didn't have enough, so she used a credit card instead, noting that he grumbled something under his breath as he swiped it. Within minutes, she was back outside, signaling us to pull around to the room she'd just rented. 8. 2 rooms, 1 night. We ended up parking in front of 2 side-by-side rooms. My sister and I followed Mom into the right-hand room, while my brother and his girlfriend took the left. Mom told us to bring only the essentials for the night. No reason to unpack everything when we'd leave first thing in the morning. It was then that the tension settled like a fog. The fluorescent light overhead flickered. The walls were a drab beige, stained in places as though water had leaked from the ceiling at some point. The carpet gave off a faint musty odor, and the beds, 2 queen-sized lumps covered with thin, cheap comforters, looked anything but inviting. My sister wrinkled her nose, and I felt the same discomfort. When Mom ran her hand over the bedspread, she grimaced. "Feels grimy," she muttered. I nodded in agreement, recalling the swirl of dread I'd felt when we first drove into town. My sister announced she wanted a shower. Mom tried the faucet in the bathroom. Nothing happened. No gurgle, no sputter, just silence. My brother called from the other room, saying their shower worked, so maybe she could use it there. My sister marched off to the adjoining door, which my brother propped open for her. Mom and I were left in our dismal little room, the overhead light making the walls look somehow yellower. I took a seat on the edge of the bed, only to stand immediately, goosebumps prickling my arms again. The sheets felt cold and slightly damp. Mom gave me a bleak smile, as though to say, "I know, this place is awful, but we just need to make it through the night." That's when my brother burst in, face drained of color. He looked shaken, a stark contrast to his usual bravado. "Pack up your stuff," he hissed. "We're leaving now." 9. Blood in the bathroom. Mom's eyes widened. "What happened?" she asked. My brother beckoned her into the hall. I followed, my heartbeat thundering. My sister trailed close behind, her face pale. Before he could answer, we saw my sister's trembling hands. She'd apparently fled the other room's bathroom in a hurry. It took a moment to piece together the story. When they switched on the bathroom light in their room, they noticed what looked like spatters of dried, dark red spots in the tub. My sister, alarmed, summoned my brother, who confirmed it was definitely blood. Dried, but unmistakable. He didn't say whether it was a lot or just a few drops, but it was enough for him to slam the bathroom door shut and come running. My mom's jaw clenched. "Forget it," she said. "We're not staying here." She motioned for us to gather our things. The tension in the air thickened, a palpable sense that we needed to leave immediately. We threw our minimal belongings back into bags. My heart hammered as I grabbed my charger, stuffed it into my backpack, and headed toward the SUV. My sister clutched my hand, whispering, "This place is wrong." We didn't bother with the office or a refund. The front desk clerk's presence, whoever or whatever he was, felt like a looming threat. In a flurry, we piled into our vehicles. My brother and his girlfriend took off first, pulling back onto the gravel road. My mom cranked the engine, spinning the steering wheel to follow. Dust and pebbles flew behind us as we tore out of the motel lot, never looking back. The abandoned gas station. Though we expected to find an exit sign or a highway marker leading out of this bizarre place, we were confronted instead by rows of silent buildings and twisted side streets. Mom and my brother used their turn signals as though habit might guide us to the main road. But the GPS again failed to match anything we saw outside the windows. We needed gas badly. My brother's small four-door was running near empty. Miraculously, A gas station appeared at the edge of town, just on the cusp of where the buildings gave way to more pine forest. Its canopy lights were on, illuminating 4 pumps in a pale glow. Yet no other cars were present, not even an employee's vehicle parked anywhere near the small convenience store. My brother pulled in. We followed. The overhead lights buzzed, casting an anemic, bluish hue on the asphalt. The store's windows were lit from within, revealing racks of snacks and a cash register up front. My sister's breath caught. "Does anyone even work here?" she whispered. My mom pursed her lips. "We'll do this quickly." We hopped out, the crisp night air swirling around us again. My brother began pumping gas, glancing nervously at the surrounding darkness. My sister hovered beside me as Mom said, "Let's grab some snacks if the store is open. Then we'll head to the next real town and stay somewhere reputable." We filed into the convenience store, leaving my brother's girlfriend in the car. The door chimed, the fluorescent lighting inside making my eyes ache after the gloom outside. But at least it looked normal. Rows of candy, shelves of jerky, a cooler full of soda. The lone cashier, a gaunt young man, stood behind the register, eyes downcast at a magazine. He barely acknowledged us. My sister nudged me, then whispered, "He looks weird, doesn't he?" I shrugged, not wanting to stare. We grabbed chips, bottled water, some soda. Mom paid for the gas. The cashier finally spoke, a monotone. "Have a nice night." Then we were outside again. 11. Shadows by the shed. I headed toward the SUV, my arms full of snacks, while my brother finished at the pump. His girlfriend was already in their car, rummaging for something. That's when I heard a sudden intake of breath from my brother. I turned, eyes following his gaze. At the far edge of the gas station property sat a small shed, its wooden walls sagging, paint flaking off in strips. Beyond the shed, the pines stood like a solid wall of blackness. For a split second, we both spotted movement, 2 figures, or shapes, darting behind the shed. Their motion was so fast, it was as though they glided rather than ran. My pulse spiked. "What was that?" I whispered, stepping closer to my brother. He shook his head, jaw clenched. "Get in the car." His voice held none of its usual confidence. It was laced with real fear. We took a step toward our vehicles, and that's when we noticed them. 3 pairs of glowing eyes, a shade of yellowish amber, peering out from behind the shed. They were high off the ground, taller than an average person, yet they clearly belonged to some kind of creatures. My brother muttered a curse under his breath. "Go!" he hissed. Without another word, we bolted. I yanked open the SUV door, practically throwing myself inside. My sister, already in the back seat, scrambled to make room. Mom hit the ignition, the engine roaring to life. In the rearview mirror, I caught a brief glimpse of those eyes shifting in the darkness, like they were following our every movement. My brother's car peeled out first, tires squealing on the asphalt, and we followed close behind. 12. Escaping the town. That final stretch through the streets of this unknown town was a blur of flickering streetlights and looming shadows. My mom drove faster than she should have, ignoring stop signs or yield intersections. The place still seemed devoid of life. No cars, no silhouettes in the windows. Yet it felt like the entire town was watching us. My stomach churned, cold sweat trickling down my back. Eventually, we reached the sign that presumably marked the town limits, the same sign we'd seen upon entering. We tore past it, the headlights capturing only a faint glint of letters we couldn't decipher. As soon as we crossed that boundary, the uneasy pressure that had seemed to blanket the air lifted, like someone switched off a static frequency. Even so, I was shaking, and so was my sister beside me. My brother's car led the way onto the main highway, where the GPS flickered back into recognition. We sped on for another 30 minutes before we found a major chain hotel in the next real, documented town. A place that felt ordinary, with bright neon signs, a row of gas stations, and the comforting sprawl of a 24-hour truck stop. 13. The aftermath. A night of uneasy sleep. We pulled into a Holiday Inn around midnight. The glaring lobby lights were an immediate solace. We checked in under Mom's name, trying to look calm in front of the front desk staff, though our clothes were rumpled, and our eyes likely betrayed our lingering fear. My brother and his girlfriend got a separate room, as usual, but we all ended up congregating in ours for a while. Nobody was quite ready to sleep. The conversation was riddled with questions we couldn't answer. My sister kept asking about the blood in the motel bathtub, about the weird dumpster movement, about the eyes behind the shed. My brother's girlfriend chimed in, saying she'd glimpsed something running across the church parking lot earlier. Mom sat at the small desk in the corner, methodically sipping water, as though trying to puzzle it all out. She looked up directions, old maps, anything to confirm the presence of that unknown town we just fled. But no matter what she typed into her phone or asked the hotel staff, the answer was the same. There's no town like that nearby. You must have gone way off track. Our hearts sank each time we realized the employees at the Holiday Inn knew nothing about a place that was supposedly just an hour's drive up the road. Some even claimed that particular route was nothing but forests for miles. They gazed at us with mild suspicion or polite disbelief. Eventually, exhaustion weighed us down. My sister fell asleep on one of the beds, hugging a pillow to her chest. Mom, with a lingering glance at me, whispered, "We're safe now." But her voice quivered. That night, I barely slept. Each time I closed my eyes, I pictured those tall, silent buildings, the flickering streetlights, and those eyes glowing amber in the shadows. 14. Seeking proof. Morning arrived with bright sunlight and the promise of normalcy. Over a mediocre continental breakfast, we recounted the events again, as if by hashing out details in daylight we could make better sense of them. My brother insisted we must have been driving on a forest back road that wasn't updated in the GPS system. My mom said perhaps it was a ghost town, though ghost towns usually don't have functioning electricity or employees at a motel or gas station. Then came the strangest realization. None of us remembered the name of the town, despite seeing the sign. We'd all glanced at it, but it was like the memory had been scrubbed. We tried prompting each other. "It started with an H, right? No, maybe a B?" But we only wound up confused. In the immediate aftermath, we'd scribbled it down on a scrap of paper, determined never to drive that route again. But by the next day, that piece of paper was nowhere to be found. We searched the SUV, the car's glove box, our backpacks, nothing. Mom eventually asked the local convenience store clerks if they knew of any small settlements with a motel and a church on a hill. Every single person shook their head, offering only a perplexed frown or a polite suggestion to check county records. We didn't bother. Some part of us wanted to forget it, to shove the memory into a dark corner of our minds. Another part realized that even if we tried to find it again, we might fail. The journey continued after that. We finished our trip, arriving in Oklahoma or Washington, whichever direction we'd been heading. Life went on, school, jobs, relationships. But the topic of that town never strayed far from our collective consciousness. Occasionally, over holiday dinners or family get-togethers, one of us would bring it up, asking if anyone had pieced together new insights. We never had. We'd recall the motel's old-fashioned structure, the silent gas station, the hollow stares of the clerk in the office, each face different to each of us. We'd think about the sign we passed, how it glinted in our headlights yet left no trace in our minds. We'd wonder about those glowing eyes behind the shed. Were they people wearing some reflective gear? Animals with odd eyeshine? Or something else entirely? A few times, my brother half-seriously proposed driving back that route, trying to recreate the conditions of that night. But Mom always vetoed the idea. She insisted it was too dangerous, that we might get lost again or run into something far worse. My sister, shaken by the memory of the blood in the shower, fully agreed. Me? I felt torn, a curiosity gnawing at the edges of my fear. But I never pressed the issue. Some mysteries, I believed, were better left alone. 16. The haunting questions. Years went by, and I grew older. My recollections dimmed around the edges, possibly worsened by the head trauma I had sustained at 14 after an unrelated accident. Yet the core events remained vivid. That creeping sense of dread when we first saw the town's lights, the frigid hush of the church parking lot, the bizarre figure behind the motel desk, who, to me, looked like a frail old man, but to my sister was a moody young clerk, and to my brother was a bearded middle-aged fellow. Sometimes, I wondered if we'd crossed into a parallel reality. Other times, I rationalized it was a near-abandoned settlement, operating on outdated infrastructure, which we perceived as more sinister than it really was. But how to explain the mismatched clerk appearances, or the fact that no record of the town existed on any map we could find? Even if it had been abandoned, how to account for its spotless streets, the functioning streetlights of that sickly orange hue, and the random, terrifying glimpses of movement in the shadows? And then there was the matter of the motel's water not working in our room, but blood staining the shower in the other. Who had used it last? Why hadn't it been cleaned? How did the front desk clerk fail to mention such a glaring issue? 17. Family discussions. One Thanksgiving, while we were all gathered at my brother's new place, the conversation drifted to that night. His wife, formerly his girlfriend during the trip, recalled dozing off in the passenger seat and waking to the sensation that the car was moving underwater. She confessed that even though she was half asleep, the moment she glimpsed the town, she felt a visceral desire to leave. "It was like an alarm going off in my head," she said. "I remember thinking, this place is wrong, we need to keep driving." But I was too tired to protest. My mother, sipping coffee, murmured that she'd had nightmares for weeks afterward. She'd dream of rolling into a deserted street, only to realize her children had disappeared, lured away by some silent watchers in the alleyways. Waking up, she'd find herself sweaty, heart racing, the images refusing to fade. My sister, now grown, recalled how she, too, had looked up at that front desk clerk and seen a completely different person than I described. She asked me if I thought it was a trick of the light. I shook my head, feeling the old unease resurface. We concluded there was no easy explanation, only the creeping suspicion that we collectively witnessed something beyond the ordinary. 18. Trying to forget. Despite the magnitude of the experience, life has a way of pushing these events to the background. I graduated high school, moved on to college, and started a job. My brother and his wife built a life of their own. My sister grew into a confident young adult. My mom continued her routine, sometimes traveling between Oklahoma and Washington, but never on that same route, never anywhere near those pine forests. Yet the memory lingered like a scar. Every now and then, I'd search the internet, throwing out keywords like "ghost town, motel with blood and shower," or "invisible small town and forest." The results were always scattered bits of unrelated stories or creepypastas that shared a passing resemblance, but never quite matched. I'd rummage through old road maps, squinting at the highways that span the Northwest. Nothing rang a bell. If I closed my eyes, I could still see that plain green sign with a place name spelled out in big white letters, but the name itself remained maddeningly elusive. I found solace in a small online forum dedicated to unexplained road trip stories. People shared bizarre tales of phantom highways and absent towns. Some recounted glimpses of abandoned diners that later vanished. Others told stories of picking up hitchhikers who disappeared at the next rest stop. While none perfectly mirrored our experience, it comforted me to know we weren't alone in having encountered something unexplainable on a lonely stretch of American highway. As time went on, I developed a theory. Maybe the place existed once, but was officially dissolved or left uncharted for some reason. Perhaps a tragedy, like a massacre or an epidemic, led to its desertion, leaving behind only empty buildings and a handful of caretakers or squatters. That could explain the rundown condition, the deserted streets. Yet how to account for the brand new look of the roads and the lights that still burned? Another angle haunted me late at night, that we crossed into some pocket of reality, an overlap where the normal rules frayed. We'd walked among illusions, seen different versions of the same desk clerk, and glimpsed shapes behind a shed that defied explanation. Whenever I voiced this out loud, I felt ridiculous, and yet it tugged at me with an unsettling clarity. XX, the final attempt. The last time I seriously tried to uncover the truth was around my 21st birthday. My older brother and I were visiting Mom, and after a few drinks, we decided to lay out the specifics. Date/year, 2012. Route, we were traveling between Washington and Oklahoma, unclear whether going to or from. Description, a small, nameless town with sickly orange streetlights, immaculate streets, an old church with a white light, and a rundown motel with separate office. Notable details: blood in the shower, no running water in the adjacent room, a possible figure behind a dumpster, 3 pairs of glowing eyes near a shed, and a gas station with no staff vehicles. Clerk sightings: each family member saw a different person behind the front desk. We combined these into one cohesive summary, then spent hours scouring the internet. We even looked at satellite images of potential routes, zooming in on every small settlement. Each time, we hit a dead end. There were some places that looked vaguely similar, but they either had no names or didn't match the layout. The few times we thought we'd found a lead, it turned out to be a normal, functioning community. No luck. Frustrated and tired, we gave up. As the clock crept past midnight, Mom tapped my shoulder and reminded me that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. "We survived," she said. "That's enough." 21. The strange legacy. Even though we never found the town again or proved its existence, the incident shaped me in subtle ways. Whenever I'm on a long stretch of highway at night, I keep my eyes peeled for anomalies. My sister admits she's still uneasy about small motels, especially if they look old or poorly lit. My brother rarely talks about the night anymore, but the mention of pine trees or deserted roads makes his expression darken. Sometimes, I wonder if someone else stumbled upon that place, if they, too, fled in terror. Other times, I fear that if we had stayed the night, if that shower incident hadn't spooked us, something far worse might have happened. The mind reels with possibilities: a violent caretaker, a cult, some supernatural entity. Or maybe those shapes we saw were just wild animals. Except wild animals don't usually possess glowing amber eyes at eye level with the top of a shed. 22. Putting the pieces together. Late one evening, years later, I tried weaving the fragments into a coherent narrative. Entering the town. A long day's drive, nearing midnight. A sign bearing a town name we cannot recall. A sudden drop in temperature or atmosphere, an overwhelming sense of being watched. The church. Lone white light contrasting the sickly street lamps. Possible movement near a dumpster. The motel. 2-story L-shaped building, about 30 to 40 rooms. Office separate from the guest rooms. Water not working in one room, dried blood in the shower next door. Unpleasant clerk whose appearance shifted in each of our memories. The gas station. No attendant vehicles, just a lone cashier who barely acknowledged us. Figures running behind a shed, then 3 sets of glowing eyes, taller than the structure. Escape. Rapid departure. No sign of other people, though the entire town was well lit. Re-emergence on a highway that should have been miles away. Nearby real town with no knowledge of this place. All these elements coalesced into a single story brimming with horror movie tropes, yet it was our reality for a night. A part of me wants to believe we just let our imaginations run wild, mass hysteria or shared delusion triggered by exhaustion. But the footprints, the lights, the locked doors of the church, it all felt too tangible. Once, while scouring an online forum, I stumbled upon a post where someone claimed they drove through a place with bizarrely pristine streets and malfunctioning motel water. They described seeing shadows that flickered in the corners. My heart leapt. I messaged them privately, but they never responded. Their post vanished within days, leading me to wonder if it was just a hoax or a rehashed urban legend. Another angle is that some small logging community or religious commune deliberately avoided outsiders, shutting down official listings. Maybe they had a reason to hide, but that doesn't account for the weird illusions or the fact that we each saw the motel clerk differently. 24. Conclusions, or lack thereof. At this point, I've accepted that we may never have answers. The memory persists as a testament to the idea that the world can still harbor pockets of enigma, even in an era of smartphones and satellite mapping. Sometimes, roads lead to uncharted territories in ways we can't foresee. When people ask me about the scariest moment of my life, I think of that deserted street, the glint of the sign in our headlights, and the dread that seeped into my bones the instant we crossed into that place. I think of the blood in the shower, the eyes behind the shed, and the suffocating feeling that we were trespassing where we did not belong, somewhere that existed outside of normal time and space. 25. Epilogue. The town that never was. It's been years since we pulled out of that gas station parking lot, hearts in our throats. My family rarely brings it up anymore, except when recounting weird travel stories. Yet the experience remains a bond between us, a dark secret that reminds us how fragile our sense of reality can be. We face something inexplicable and live to tell the tale, albeit with no proof or closure. Every so often, I'll drive on a lonely highway at night, watch the pines blur by, and catch my breath if I see a faint glow in the distance. The question rears up, what if it's that town again? My heartbeat spikes until, inevitably, I realize it's just another run-of-the-mill rest stop or trucker's diner. Relief floods me, followed by a trace of disappointment. A tiny part of me wishes we could find that cursed place again, just to settle the mystery once and for all. But perhaps it's better that it remains lost, tucked away behind a veil of memory. Our escape taught me caution. It taught me to trust my instincts when something feels off. Most of all, it taught me that some roads are better left untraveled, some towns are better left unvisited, and some questions, once asked, can never be satisfactorily answered. Subscribe to my YouTube channel. Don't forget to like and click the bell.